So let's start by introducing our moderator and the current chair of the Young Leaders Committee. It's Andy Crestodina, and he is co-founder and chief marketing officer of Orbit Media, an award-winning 38-person digital agency in Chicago. And over the past 18 years, Andy's been providing digital marketing advice to over 1,000 businesses. He speaks at national marketing conferences, writes for big marketing blogs, and hosts a marketing podcast. And he's written hundreds of articles on content strategy, search engine optimization, influencer marketing, conversion and analytics, and he has been featured in various publications and websites, including, not bad list, Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, and Social Media Explorer. So thank you for your moderating skills this morning, Andy. And now on to introduce our speaker, who I just learned last night after following him on Twitter. We have a common passion in motorcycles, so we'll maybe ask a question about that too. I don't think we had that on our list. But Ganesh Bell is the president of Uptake, the industrial AI and Internet of Things software leader. And prior to Uptake, Ganesh served as the first ever chief digital officer at GE and the CEO of GE Power Digital. Ganesh also previously served as the chief products officer and EVP at ServiceSource, where he led the company through a successful IPO. He's a veteran of Silicon Valley, and his breadth of expertise spans platforms, analytics, and enterprise applications across leaders like SAP, PeopleSoft, and JD Edwards. And in fact, he created Ucentric's leading CRM products and led its core development to a successful acquisition by JD Edwards. Very nice. So he was named number 11 in Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business. Also very nice. And he holds a BS in mathematics from the University of Madras in India and an MS in computer science from North Dakota State University, which, God bless you, you went there. That's probably another interesting story. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ganesh Bell.
Good morning and welcome to Uptake. That's my Twitter handle at Ganesh Bell. You can follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when we talked about this topic of future of work, I was really excited because it kind of is the last decade of my career in a lot of ways. But it's also one of the most complex and fascinating topics to be packing into such a short time. So I will definitely fail. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So I've lived and worked most of my career in Silicon Valley. And I've been an entrepreneur, been in startups, and worked in some of the biggest enterprise software companies in the world, and now a rebooted entrepreneur here at Uptake. About a decade ago, when software as a service was becoming a mainstream business model, and the move to cloud and big data was happening, I was at a biggest software company called SAP, and I would give a talk called "The Next Big Software Company Isn't a Software Business." And people go, what the heck does that mean? I would say, well, there will be industries and businesses that codify their IP in software, but they won't sell you software. And today we have great examples of that. Netflix, Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, Grubhub, these are all software companies. So I kept talking about it for a long time. And about 5 years ago, a 125-year-old company called GE called me, and it was like a moment of, do I actually believe my own bullshit? So I said, all right, I've got to convince this company that they've got to do something about software and analytics. Managed to get them to create this job called the Chief Digital Officer, and I was the first one, one of the earliest ones in the world, and ended up building a very large digital business. Oh, thank you. That would be useful. This is the future of work. Which is all just presentations in the future. And so going there, I got a belief that this actually applies to lots of other industries, which have kind of led me here, which is the future of enterprise software meeting the future of work. Now, when people talk about this topic, you'll hear sensational headlines. Amazon created 146,000 jobs last year. 146,000 people were hired last year. Also, 75,000 robots were hired last year. And you'll also hear studies from the Oxford University that 47%, nearly half of all the jobs in the world, could be automated over the next couple of decades. And then you'll hear topics like basic income and some cuckoo theories from Elon Musk about we're living in a simulation. We'll come back to that, all right? Now, But the point is that this is a topic that is important to many, and it's actually captured the imagination of many people in the world. If you talk to an economist, economists will tell you that every time there was new technology in the history of the world, and this works, yes, we have new technology creates new industries, which creates new jobs. New technology creates productivity, which expands companies, which lowers prices of goods, which creates new jobs. But new technology also disrupts and dislocates and eliminates jobs. But every time this has happened in the past, economists would tell you that there was automation anxiety with every technology. In fact, if you Google it, you'll see headlines from all the way from the 1900s. You can almost track it. Every decade there's been a robots taking your job or automation anxiety in some shape or form. But they will all tell you that this time it feels different. If you talk to the technologists who's usually used to predicting about one single technology, whether it's the internet or data or big data or robotics or manufacturing, they'll tell you that we're now at an onslaught of where technologies coming together, whether it's robotics or additive manufacturing or drones and at work, all coming together with AI is accelerating at a pace where predicting the future is actually harder, and actually this time it feels very different. If you talk to management consultants or strategy firms who have always advised companies on how to deal with evolving nature of work, they'll tell you work itself is changing. In many companies, workforce is actually getting older, younger, and diverse all at the same time. And we are having to adopt new ways to work because things that were kind of considered cool, like design thinking and the lean startup, is now being adopted by every single discipline, every single company in the world. And they will tell you that this time it feels different. If you talk to leaders in leading some of the biggest companies in the world, they'll tell you they have dealt with lots of these things in the past, which is from leading change and big transformations in companies or innovation dilemma or their industries getting reimagined. They'll tell you this time they're grappling with tons of other things. Digital transformation, moving from product to as-a-service business model, or creating their business itself as a platform, or becoming part of a bigger ecosystem and a connected network orchestration system. And they will all tell you that while they've dealt with a lot of change in the past, this time it feels different. And why does it feel different this time? Because something's happened in the last decade. We long held the belief that technology or work itself could be defined in two ways: routine tasks and non-routine tasks. And routine tasks are things that could be automated, and non-routine tasks are things that cannot be automated because they have intuition, judgment, and creativity attached to it. But something happened in the last decade, especially in the last half a decade, where things that require creativity, intuition, and judgment can also be automated. This art that you see in the background is actually an art that is generated by an AI. Think of it as an autonomous painter that learned lots of different paintings, painting skills, techniques, and aesthetics, and is now able to generate art. And if you go back to some ideas of how this started, right, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of unknowns, which leads to a lot of anxiety. This is working. I'm having to do 3 or 4 clicks every time, so bear with me. Is it? All right. And the reason is there's something that's happened which is all about the acceleration of technology. Humans don't have a reference point for something that's continuously accelerating. I saw a talk that once said, we all only have reference points of accelerating for a few seconds in a car, but we don't have a reference point for something that's been accelerating for decades, and we can't understand what is happening. And some will tell you this is like Moore's law in computing, which is the computer chips double in power every 18 months, or actually originally quoted as 2 years, and reduce in price every 2 years. But while that's been slowing down network storage, all of those things have been accelerating. And it's been accelerating at a pace that it's beyond human comprehension. The best example of that is about in 2004, there was a book called The New Division of Labor. And in that, 2 economists argued that computers cannot easily substitute for humans in jobs like driving. And in fact, at the same time, some of the leading thinkers in AI would always use this as an example. They'll always say that, what can AI do and cannot do? They'll say, something like driving a car, AI will never, ever be able to do. Some of the best thinkers in the world said that. And it was exactly that same year that DARPA had a challenge. The Defense Department, DARPA, had a challenge on autonomous driving. And the challenge was to complete a 132-mile course. The winner crashed after 7 miles, less than 8 miles. And just 1 year, the following year, in 2005, five cars completed the full 132-mile course. And in a decade, more than 1 million miles was driven by autonomous cars by Google. And that's 75 years of human driving. Think about that, in just a decade. Now, that's accelerating at a crazy speed. Now it's about 20 million miles have been driven in autonomous cars. In fact, I share the road many days with autonomous cars in Silicon Valley most of the weekends when I go back from Chicago. And that change, while it's fascinating, something even more profound happened. How many of you have watched the documentary AlphaGo? If you haven't, get on Netflix, watch it. It is one of the most riveting things about one of the most boring games for some people, but it is actually one of the most ancient games in the world called Go that's been played for thousands of years. And in that game, Google built an AI to play this game called Go. And it beat the European champion, then it took on Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol is the world champion. And there is millions of people in the world watching, and people commentating on the game, and they've been commenting on every single move the AI was making. And then something happened, where people could not understand what the AI was doing. They couldn't understand how AI was playing the game, because it had just escaped human comprehension. It had escaped human understanding of the various strategies needed to win in the game. Clearly, technology and remote controls haven't accelerated. All right, I'm going to just move this right here and do it myself. All right. And what had happened was that this idea of the game theory escaped human comprehension, and it was actually a moment where humans felt scared. Many people felt scared that, okay, we don't understand this anymore. And some actually thought this was exciting, because we can now comprehend the game and understand the game in new ways possible through AI that was not possible through human imagination. Maybe it's the proximity. All right, probably it is the proximity. Okay. And this is probably one of the most seminal articles, I think, of our times. In 2011, Marc Andreessen, if many of you don't know, was the founder of Mosaic, which is the original browser that launched the internet. In fact, he was a grad at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and he was there, and I was a student, and I exchanged code with him at that time. Also one of the most prolific venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. He was absolutely tired of defending all the software companies and the overhyped valuations. And he said, all of the technologies that we need now to reimagine business in the world we know it is actually here. And that was in 2011, and since then he's been proven right. Many of the companies that he used as examples are now the companies that dominate the Fortune 1000. And now many people are using this phrase, AI is eating software. It sounds catchy, but the idea being something as simple as this. If software was accelerating the transformation of industries, AI just gave it a major, major, major turbo boost. This thing is happening. And we at Uptake saw this in the industrial world. And that's where we started in the industrial world, because we saw a decade of industrial productivity going down and unused data going up. And also the nature of work in all of these industries changing, because we're deploying more robots, more drones, and humans with wearables, generating more data. In fact, there's more data being generated by all of these machines in these industries than any human can enter into an ERP system. So the world needed to change. A new way of work had to happen, and a new way of actually supplementing this work had to happen. And we saw this in many different industries. And a lot of these industries, less than 1% of data is actually being used. In all these industries, and if you talk to analysts, they'll tell you there's about, numbers vary wildly, but it's always in the billions. 9 billion, 20 billion, or 25 billion devices that will be connected by 2025. But in all these industries, when you connect all this data and learn from that data, you can actually augment human intelligence with artificial intelligence and do some simple things. And simple things like predict failures in machines. And just in 4 years, since the inception of the company, we had built an industrial AI and IoT platform where we have been trained, our algorithms and engines have been trained on more than 1 billion operating hours. And we can now predict more than 55,000 failures across many different industries. Just think about it. Just in 4 years, a simple startup right here in Chicago. And what can you do when you apply more data and more power across many different industries? And it all started with something as simple as this. We said, can we detect anomalies just from signal data, from sensor data, from what's called SCADA data in all these industries? And we looked at anomalies and we said, if we can do one anomaly, can you actually do anomalies across multiple industries and build something called an anomaly detection engine, which will detect it automatically? And if we can do that automatically, can we actually teach it to detect failures? So we built something called a failure prediction engine. And very quickly, in industries that we don't know anything about, we can now go in and predict 90% of all the failures in a locomotive. And we knew squat about locomotives. And we didn't know squat about wind turbines. Now we do prediction of wind turbines. Now we do that. And when we started building these engines, we realized that there's more engines to be built. So every one of these AI engines started coming together and started predicting new outcomes. And when we collect all of these outcomes and put them into a platform, we can apply to a whole industry, like construction and mining and manufacturing and energy, and you can create big impact, millions and millions of dollars, because the value of a simple prediction in any one of the industries is incredibly high, and we're now improving not just the productivity and profitability, but also human safety, and there's actually societal benefits. Just by helping energy companies produce more energy from the same wind, we're also offsetting carbon footprint. So there's big societal impact. In fact, the World Economic Forum would tell you that just by deploying AI and digital technologies in just the industrial world, there's over $3 trillion of societal value. This is not market size, this is societal value, like decarbonizing the world and everything, right? And improving life standards and health across the world. So one of the questions I get asked by leaders across the world is, how do you lead in a world that's getting rewritten, reimagined, and reworded in software and in AI? So I offer this as a simple playbook. The first is, all of you need to build a belief system. A belief system that the future of work is actually changing. A belief system that digital will reimagine all your industries. A belief system that in every industry there are critical control points of applications, control points of data, control points of algorithms that you need to shape, you need to own, you need to participate in. If you don't have that belief system, don't get started. Just don't do it. You'll only waste money. In fact, if you're a CEO, the only job is to convince your board to have this belief system. If you're working for the CEO, your only job is to convince your CEO and not lose religion. In fact, I would set up meetings in my past job with my previous boss that get your religion back. And it's that important. If you don't have the belief system, you won't be able to do it. And that is how companies like Amazon, for example, are today in businesses they could never, ever imagine. Even 5 years ago, Amazon couldn't predict all the businesses they would be in today. All they've done is just follow that belief system that this will fundamentally reimagine every industry that they are in. Another thing that I would offer is you have to adopt new ways to work. And I always get this idea that, okay, we get this idea of a lean startup. I get this idea of a minimum viable product. These are ideas that are cool for a software company or a startup, but it's actually not that applicable to big companies. That's actually not true. One of my favorite examples is this, the video that's running in the background. I'm a snowboarder, and my friends who ski hate the fact that I'm a snowboarder because they have to wait at the lift every time that I have to sit down and strap on my boots. And they're tired of it, and Burton actually solved the problem last year for me. They created something called a step-on boots. And normally something that would have taken them about 4 to 5 years in engineering and design and prototyping and perfecting the product was crunched to just a few months. They took a 3D printer, learned the ideas of lean startup, took a 2-pizza team up a mountain, and taught them design thinking, brought customers in, user-centered design, and started printing bindings that would actually break. So every day they would print a new 3D binding, and in the matter of a few months, they had created the world's first incredible, amazing binding. So now I'm not going to go back to skiing, I'm going to be snowboarding. So there are ideas like that you can adopt from all these different industries and apply it to any aspect of your company. It doesn't matter about building products. You can apply it in HR. This idea of a minimum viable product is actually a good one. And you can bring multidisciplinary thinking in almost every aspect of problem solving in business. Another thing I would offer is this idea of new measures and metrics. Well, we're all used to measuring things like profitability, revenue, and margins. I would say companies that measure other things also progress more. The video here is a company called Beta Brand, which it's a fashion startup in Silicon Valley that started with a simple idea that all we will do is measure how many photos on Twitter and Instagram get shared of people wearing our clothes. And that's it. That's the only measure of success. And very soon they found out that they could understand what their customers were doing and their behavior, and very soon now in a decade is one of the largest crowdsourced design company. They don't design any of the clothes that they make. It's all designed by their customers, and they make them. And just by following that idea of measuring new things. And in a simple way, in software companies, people will tell you this is very simple. Measure adoption, measure engagement, measure usage, and then it will lead to new ideas, and you'll start measuring these statistics over time. And the last thing I'll tell you, and people ask or are always surprised about this, I would say is amplify innovation through diversity. And anybody would tell you that while we've consciously or unconsciously designed a work world that's not a fair representation of the world that we live in, it's actually even more important in a world that's getting recoded in software. Because not only can we simply double our innovation capacity if there's more diversity at work. This is diversity in gender, diversity in thought, diversity in disciplines. But you also need this because you don't build a racist or a sexist AI or even unfair, unbiased algorithms in the world. It's even more important. So what does the future of work hold to you? Well, I'll tell you that this is just a simple playbook. This is just a simple playbook to actually get started in your journey in a future of work. But there's one thing that I will tell you that is more important than to even understand this playbook. And that's that the greatest threat that you all face is actually complacency. So it's more important to take that first step. Even if you don't know the next 10 steps, it's important to take the first 2 or 3 steps, because you'll actually learn by adopting these simple playbooks that you'll know the right metrics, the right team to put together in place that will figure out the next several steps. So with that, thank you, and I'll take some questions.
So we're going to have a lot of questions for you, so I'm going to try to keep my piece brief. But first, just so we all know where we are and what Uptake does, can you give us just the overview of the business?
Yeah, sure. So we describe ourselves as a industrial AI and IoT software company, and it's broadly becoming more what we call enterprise AI, which is, if you think about most companies, most CEOs, most leaders will tell you that the biggest strategic asset in a lot of companies is data. Yet when you ask them, if data is a strategic asset, can you tell me what is that data? They wouldn't be able to articulate. Or if they could articulate, they wouldn't be able to tell you where it actually resides. In a lot of industries, we've actually deployed systems like ERP and CRM, which is all about automating business processes. But we believe that we're actually entering a world where we're going to be automating business decisions. And the reason is that there is more data that's being generated by operational machines in many industries, and also operational data, whether it's like your manufacturing line, your production line, your customer behavior, or even external data like weather data, market data, consuming data. All that can be put together, and we now believe that we can actually automate decisions through AI and machine learning, and that's really what we do. So we started in an industrial world where the cost of prediction is incredibly high, but we're quickly broadening to use cases where people are building applications that are driven by machine learning and AI in the enterprise.
Yeah, I can imagine it's universally applicable because anomaly detection is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, that would be useful in any category. But thinking about disruption, the big picture, what would you tell a graduate today? What advice would you give to a current college graduate?
It's a great question. I would say that while there's something, I'll step back on the AI scary part a little bit, because I think people always tell you that while it's fascinating to grab headlines that AI just broke through the creativity barrier or judgment and intuition, those still remain the most important skills. Because what we're talking about is something most technologists will tell you is something called narrow AI. Narrow AI is just that, which is our anomaly detection just does anomaly detection. It doesn't learn how to play the violin or learn how to play or even create that art. That AI autonomous art generator can only do that, right? We haven't entered anywhere near the realm of general AI. So the most important skill, I think, into the future is learning how to learn. And while we've always talked about a continuous lifelong learning journey for many of us, really our education system hasn't prepared us for that. And I think there are a lot of schools now, design schools, and also people going back to embracing ideas like Udacity and so on and continuously learning. But most things that universities do today is about learning how to learn. And I think that's probably one of the most important skills. And still think creative skills and design skills and actually experimentation skills. And if you believe that it's actually a thing, my nephew goes to California College of Arts in San Francisco, and he's doing industrial design and human-centered design. And it's amazing that he actually has the ability to experiment on something as simple as here was a task to go build a chopstick. And there is not a whole lot of things you can do with chopsticks. It's just 2 pieces of sticks. But the amazing thing that this idea of experimental learning lets them create new ideas. And I saw a video of a computer scientist in Japan who actually built a cucumber sorting machine with AI and machine learning and Raspberry Pi for $2,000. So it can sort 8 different kinds of cucumbers just by optically looking at it. My point is this idea of experimentation skills is probably one of the most important things.
Raspberry Pi, that super inexpensive platform, just a tiny piece of hardware.
$5 computer, right? It's a simple card that can run code, that can run Linux.
That's making it so accessible. You can imagine like how many people are experimenting with how many things across different industries, which makes me think it's a totally uneven rollout, isn't it? AI is being applied in different industries, different ways. You mentioned some of the things that you're in, especially industrial AI. You've got energy and manufacturing. What is the implication of the uneven distribution of AI in the future? Or how do you see disruption happening across different industries?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, which is, in fact, there's one of those famous quotes of, the future is already here, it's unevenly distributed. And that's why we started in the industrial world. The world like manufacturing, energy, in rail, in transportation, logistics, because in all of these industries, these are the industries that are actually digitally the most backward in the world, right? They are the digital laggards. And in all of these industries are also the industries where the need for doing something disruptive exists because the entire industry's value chains are being reimagined, right? In energy where we are, consumers for almost 100 years, the industry has stayed fairly the same. We generated electrons, transported electrons, people consumed electrons. Now, consumers of energy are becoming producers of energy because we're putting rooftop solar, we're buying electric cars, and we're actually creating energy storage networks. So that changes the equation in these industries. So that's why we go to these industries. But the implication of that is, I think industries that are actually further behind in simple digital technologies, even bad IT, can actually benefit more from AI because you've been left behind, right? And that's really the value we see. And very quickly, we see simple ideas of applying AI to many different ideas. Like we have a company where they drive a fleet of trucks. And they put telematics so they actually know where the trucks are. Now we could actually predict the failure in those engines. And because of that, we can now predict failures in the Army. Because we just signed the Army, we're able to now help them with predicting failures in Bradley fighting vehicle, which results in readiness for the Army. So it almost creates new use cases. In that fleet example of trucking, we actually helped them save about $10 million of fuel idling. And that wasn't the problem when we got started. They never said, help me save fuel. And then now we're getting into driver coaching. Because you're just following the digital exhaust of all of the operations. And when you follow the digital exhaust, you can come up with new use cases that you can quickly apply. And that's the big attraction of following this idea of uneven distribution.
Yeah, that's where the benefits would be the biggest, where there's the largest scale. Those old line industries where there's like transportation, manufacturing, the upside can be so huge because Anomaly detection, predictive analytics, these things will show you things much sooner where the implication can be billions.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that. Anxiety.
Yeah.
What worries you?
What worries me? Actually, I'm not that worried. I'm fairly optimistic about the future. I think we live in probably the most fascinating time in the history of the world. And I think it will be true even into the future because something happened, right? Something magical is happening right now. And if you take the theory of all of this scary theory of AI out, there's real pragmatic examples like what we're talking about, right? Like saving energy. We make real impact. And when you talk about a lot of these industries that we're actually in, these are the industries that power our world, industries that build the world, industries that move the world, industries that cure the world. And there's a company right here in the building called Tempus that's applying machine learning and AI in precision medicine. And that's about curing the world. So you're bringing access. So there's something interesting that's happening where you're now able to attract really amazing technologists and really talented people in industries that are actually purposeful, that actually make an impact in the world. And that has never happened in the past. In the past, technologists only wanted to work on cool things. They want to work on the latest, greatest thing when it's hot. Today, you can work on the latest, greatest thing in the world, which is machine learning and AI and IoT and robotics and 3D printing, but actually do it in industries that are purposeful. And that's actually pretty exciting.
Yeah, you've sort of flipped the script. You seem to have more anxiety about it not being rolled out.
Yes.
Like we're missing big opportunities. Like we need that savings in transportation. We need that carbon reduction benefit in the environment.
Yeah.
It's a perspective I didn't have.
Yeah, actually, the same study tells you, which is interesting, that in the next decade, all of the consumer internet will generate about $10 trillion of value. All of consumer internet, right? But the industrial world or the business world has about $18 trillion of value. Almost double that, just by applying these digital technologies. So it's not just for the cool kids at Uber and Airbnb, this is for the rest of us.
Right, for enterprise. Yeah, that's been your focus. Let's open it up to a few questions. You were first, go right ahead. Carl.
Yeah, so I think you sort of touched on this in a number of ways in terms of how to learn. And I'm curious of how you sort of solve this problem within your company. You have, and this is the problem I have. I have sort of my data science team, and then you have the sort of automated learning.
Yeah.
Right. And so both those are real good at sort of solving a task, building a model or solving a task. But I think the challenging part is how do you figure out what to solve, where to go hunt, which data to look at, and where do you start first? How do you think about that if you have X amount of data set? Where do you direct your resources, both automated and human resources, to go hunt to find the best opportunities or best insights?
Did everyone hear the question?
Okay, so I'll do that, the data part, and also talk about how we as a culture are trying to build this idea of learning to learn inside. In data, actually, some of the things that we created were born out of our own necessity. We were just trying to scratch our own itch. We had the same problem, which is we had about 100 data scientists and data engineering people looking at lots of different data sets and figuring out that, okay, data is actually not pristine, not clean, and most of the time they were building infrastructure to just get data to a point where they can actually do something useful with it or even try to comprehend or understand that data. That's really the foundation of our data platform, building data pipelines, building data ingestion mechanisms. Then at some point we accepted the fact that data will always be dirty. Data will always be not clean. It will actually be incomplete. But what if we can apply our own machine learning algorithms on top? So we built this idea of data integrity bots, meaning algorithms that work on data by themselves and start cleaning them. But the way we get started in most customers is the same problem, right? When customers engage with us, it'll be something like, hey, we're trying to do something with predictive maintenance, and here's all this data. Or sometimes it'll be like that, we have all of this data, we don't know what it is useful for. We actually start with outcomes. we actually go and talk to not the technology people, but the CEOs and the CXOs, and try to understand outcomes, like what do you care about? They care about unplanned downtime. They care about improving productivity. They care about improving their fuel efficiency or reducing their operating and maintenance costs. And we take those outcomes, break it down into a series of things that we think we can actually attack, and we actually go searching for data. We'll say, if you have this data, we'll be able to do this. But you have part of this data, and you have actually shitty data. So if you can complete this piece, you can get this outcome. And so it just starts a journey and really a hunt, and we'll start assembling what we call a graph. And inside our platform, we call it kind of like our asset graph or industrial graph. Now we call it an enterprise data graph. It's kind of like how Facebook understands your social graph and LinkedIn understands your professional graph. We start to map out an enterprise data graph. And they will be incomplete data, but you can then prompt the user. It's kind of like when you log into LinkedIn, LinkedIn will tell you, hey, your profile's not complete. Complete this. In the same way, we prompt our customers to say, if you have this data, we could do the following. We could improve, because we have a library of outcomes we can tell you. We've applied this algorithm. This algorithm needs the following data. So it has built over the last several years. But I would say start with outcomes and assume the data will be incomplete, and start hunting for the right sources of data. And then you'll be able to find out that over time you can get more in, and you can actually build what we call an integrity layer on top of that data.
Go ahead.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So I work in financial services. You talked about a belief system.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about how you define it for Uptake, and how that, firms outside of technology firms can talk about their belief system. And I'm just trying to figure. I want to really understand. You use religion as part of that discussion? Okay, this is serious. So I'd love to hear more about it. Thanks.
It can be serious. For some people, it's not. So anyway, I see you're in actually a fascinating industry, right? Finance is an industry that's been disrupted a few times, and it's getting through a whole. It's probably incredibly more complex. You can fill like 2 or 3 slides worth of just the amount of disruption that's happening in your industry. But people start with everything from, if you look at investment. How many of you use some Betterment or Wealthfront? Go look at them. Go look at these companies, and they are basically robotic, AI-led investment platforms. They start with something as simple as, like Mint. Personal Capital is a great example of this. They start with something that's like, connect all your bank account, connect all your trading accounts, and we'll tell you a good, nice dashboard and analytics to give you a picture of your net worth, your spending habits, and very quickly they'll start to advise you that you're actually not investing in the right way. We can actually suggest that investment, and then it becomes a robot. It's actually human-assisted and robotic, and some have taken it to the extreme. And in that industry, I actually think people have a very strong belief system. In fact, finance is actually, broadly, financial services industry is probably the one that's adopting AI the most. From hedge funds to trading floors to, I think now the commodities trading has been shut down, right? So you see technology being, so when you think about how you adopt that belief system, there are so many different technologies coming in. Blockchain, for example, fundamentally reimagining the financial markets as we actually know it. You can debate which cryptocurrency will win or fail, but the idea will actually succeed. And I always talk about you have to build a belief system at the idea level. People say, Uber will not succeed. It'll fail as a business. Lyft will fail as a business. They don't make money. It doesn't matter. But the idea of autonomous driving, the idea of hailing a cab, the idea of ride sharing will win. So build a belief system on the idea and not the company. Build a belief system that the technology will have a lasting impact. Maybe that iteration of that technology may actually fail. But the idea of why the technology was created, the intent behind the technology and the use cases will actually live on, right? That's probably the best way to go build a belief system.
You just talk a little bit about being ahead of its time. You came from GE. GE put a big bet on Predix and this platform. That seems, at least for the moment, not to have worked out.
Yeah.
Other big industrial companies, one that was affiliated with Uptake, made big bets on this. has not seemed to work out. So is it just ahead of its time? What will be the chasm? How will you cross the chasm of this vision that you have here?
So I think, it's a lot to unpack in a short time, but I will tell you that it's convenient to write headlines that big companies can't innovate. Because it's convenient. Those are stories. Those are not facts, right? I'll tell you that being in a big company when I was there, I didn't have an excuse not to be successful. And even with all the change that's going on, yes, this iteration may look like a failure, but it'll have a lasting impact. Because they did make the corner and turn around and rebuild their business model. But there's a macro challenge that was going on in a lot of these industries that they're in, because for the first time, those industries are being reimagined. That has nothing to do with the success or failure of digital. But in general, there are some lessons to be learned from companies trying to attempt to go do these things. Mm-hmm. One is trying to do this in-house fully, and trying to keep it tied to the existing business model has conflicts. So to some extent, you have to learn to disrupt yourself. And I think GE was doing a really good job with some of the previous leadership in having the belief that you should disrupt yourself. But it required, the steps that they're taking now probably needed to be done 2 to 3 years ago, where it needed to be spun off independently. That's one thing. And I would also say that in a lot of these industries, I tell people that the biggest challenge is knowing the talent to go hire. When big companies go hire digital transformation, it's scary because you don't know what you're hiring for. And some of these companies make big mistakes. They'll hire people based on their logos and their resumes of coming from some industries, but you haven't committed also your best and brightest into it. You can hire the best talent from Silicon Valley and drop it in your company. They won't be successful. In fact, they'll get frustrated in 6 months and leave. What you really need to do is take your best and brightest and challenge them to go do that too. Right? If you're not committing your best and brightest, you're not going to make that change. So there are things to be learned from these ideas of big companies attempting change, like GM is attempting autonomous driving, but they are doing something really smart, which is instead of trying to do it all in-house, they are investing in a company called Cruise Automation. I actually believe they will be successful. Mercedes and Audi are doing that too, and they will build an autonomous car, but they may actually fail in other aspects. Last year, Mercedes-Benz said that when they launch their autonomous car, you can use it. You cannot buy it, you cannot lease it. You can use it on the Uber transportation network. So in one way, they've already admitted defeat, that Uber is going to own the autonomous driving orchestration. It happens to be the Mercedes autonomous car driving around, and that's just a small piece of the entire autonomous car puzzle, right? So you have to go outside, and many companies are thinking about how you do that outside with partners, and that's why orchestrating an ecosystem is probably one of the most important topics. Where, Amazon actually is one of the most predatory companies in the world that learns from its own partners. They learned from Netflix on how to do videos. Now they're in that business. They learned from, UPS and FedEx on how to do logistics, and they're in logistics because they're just following the data. Sometimes partnership, becomes your biggest enemy over time. And I think companies should get comfortable with those ideas.
Donna, what's next?
So on Wednesday morning, we had the number 3 director from the FBI for a small breakfast meeting. And he basically secured our nightmares for the entire holiday season because the conversation was on cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So can you help us on that with cybersecurity? Like, how do we get around it? How do you think about it? How should we be thinking about that in this new world?
It's a really broad topic, and I actually will admit one of the things that we did at Uptake is we have an incredible cybersecurity team and cybersecurity practice around the software that we build. And we were also attempting to build cybersecurity around these industrial systems and came to a conclusion it's actually a very complex topic and we needed partners. So we just signed up a partnership with a company called Darktrace, one of the leaders in AI applied to cybersecurity. And in the world that we are in, I would say for our customers, we advise that those are separate disciplines in and of themselves, and that's why we partner with companies on it. And there's also this nightmare scenario that's always floated around with Internet of Things, where everything gets connected, and when things get connected, they will get hacked. And I would offer a story on the other side, which is, for all of you, it's true, for all of us, it's true that all of you, without even imagining, on your smartphones, you run the latest and the greatest operating system, right? Your cell phones and your iPads and your tablets are safer than your laptops, than your PCs. Why? Because it was actually designed for a connected world. Your PC wasn't, because it was designed for an offline world, and you run operating systems and patches that are several years older. And we see this in the industrial world that we're in, which is devices that are actually not connected are actually not that safe, because they're running things that are 5 to 10 years old. It's not keeping up with the latest, greatest patches. So I actually believe that being connected is probably more safe in today's world. But as a topic of cybersecurity broadly, I'm not the super expert on it. That's why we partner with companies. It is an important topic, but I would also tell you that in the place that we play in, things like cloud is way more secure than any data center any enterprise can run in the world. So you almost have to rely on partnerships in some of the biggest companies in cybersecurity.
Just like driverless cars are safer.
Driverless cars are safer. Absolutely true. Already than many humans. But we will have more sensationalism out of accidents out of driverless cars that lead us to believe that they are inherently unsafe.
Question in the back.
Hey Ganesh, my name is Samir. Could you talk about, we talked about the future of work today, could you talk about the future of employment? I think there's just this driving trend that policymakers are worried that as AI is successful, there'll be an employment crisis, and that they'll shove out workers and that we won't adapt and create new jobs elsewhere. And I'm just curious what your thesis is on that.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, you'll see if you'll see people divided on it, which is both job creation and job destruction. And I generally fall in the camp of jobs will be dislocated. And they'll be dislocated first in skills, they'll be dislocated geographically, they'll be dislocated in time. And this idea of crowdsourcing and the gig economy is actually real. And this idea of a 9-to-5 work that we have, for many of us, 9 to 5 is no longer true. But that idea will change, right? We already see that, where I think this curve, we often extrapolate and predict something from humans to robots or AI taking over. And I think there will be like a curve where at least for the next couple of decades, we are in the phase of where it's human plus AI and a robot, where human is being augmented by a robot or an AI. And I think there will be crossover in certain jobs over the next decade where it's robots plus humans, right? And then eventually robots themselves. There is an easy scenario to paint in many industries. There is some autonomous future, right? In the industries that we're in, where we talk to our customers, why not an autonomous power plant? It's quite possible. It's actually feasible. It's just a human condition of acceptance hasn't arrived there yet. Just like autonomous cars today are technically possible, the human condition and the acceptance hasn't happened. So I think it'll happen in many of these industries. It'll happen over a much slower period than most people predict. But I do believe that the nature of work will change from the 9 to 5, and that this idea of gig economy will definitely happen. And therefore, which means that how we regulate labor, how we think about pay, how we think about benefits, all of those things will actually go through change. But there are a lot of companies actually thinking about that right now in many industries, right? Like in housing, the job of realtor may go away. It's one of the most useless jobs that's out there. Somebody gets 6% for doing nothing. But many of those things will happen, which will dislocate work as we know it.